Variety. Some people say variety is the spice of life, and I think variety is a good thing in all parts of training as well. Now, training could be anything, right? Training could be at your job, training could be in sport, training could be riding a bike, for instance. Variety, though, is going to be the key for just about all of those things. And I'm going to kind of give you I'm going to break it down for you right now. I'll give you several examples so you can see what I'm talking about. With regard to training of sport, several videos ago I talked about periodization. One of the key concepts of periodization was variety. They had 4 or 5 different types of training that they did, starting with the macro cycle, breaking it down to the mesocycle, going into the microcycle, into each individual training session, and then within all of those you always had a recovery period of time, and then more to broader scales they have a quad, which is a quadrennial plan with those same concepts spread out over 4 years. If you looked at each one of those different components, each one of them is a little bit different, and because it is different, it adds variety to the training. Now, of course, if coaches get really adept at that whole process, they can make it even more special by adding their special touch or personal touch to the training. So can you see how there is variety built right into the training process if it is a periodized training plan? That's what I'm going to kind of focus on today, and then I'm going to give you several examples of, sport, which I just gave you, academics, and then life as well. You want to have variety so that, why is it important? I'm going to give you the answer. You want to have variety so that the training does not become so boring that the athletes and or the students don't feel like doing it anymore. This happens a lot of times with, I'll give you an example of an extra smart kid or an extra special gifted kid. Gifted could be in sport and or in the classroom. Gifted children have issues sometimes because they're so much further away than the average or the norms. Because they are so far away from the average or the norms, if you continue to give them the same thing, if you don't add variety for them, they can have all kind of challenges. I mean, they can become bored, they can start acting out, they can do all sorts of things. If you've ever worked with smaller, younger children, and I'll give that the age range from 5 to like, let's say 12, if you don't make things, if you don't change things up for them, they're going to create problems, and it's going to be difficult to control that class if it were, or wrestling and or any other type of deal where you've got, younger people involved. So how can you add variety? With the training plan, you can add variety just by having a periodized training plan, because each week is going to be a little bit different, and I'll give you an explanation. Within a mesocycle, which is essentially a month of training, and some sports scientists go from 2 to 8 weeks. Within that training period, again, I did 3-week cycles. Each cycle was a little bit different. I had 3-week cycles. The first week was a building cycle that would come up. I mean, I'm going to have to probably go into explanation here because it won't make sense unless I give you the whole detail of it. Coming off of a recovery week, which was less actual intensity, less actual volume, but probably about the same amount of intensity. But because it was less volume, the athletes are getting a breast and they're getting weak. They're getting a break, so they're getting rest and recovery, and their bodies are regenerating, so with their minds. That following week, so after the recovery week, is the first building week. So you give them a lot more volume than you did in the recovery week. In the second building week, it's even much more volume than the first week. So if you looked at those 3 weeks, each one has variety just based on the amount of volume. Now the intensity doesn't necessarily change all that much, except probably in the beginning of the year when the athletes maybe aren't as in good a shape. But each cycle, each week is different. And the variety is the volume and the intensity throughout the training period. In the recovery week, you actually do something a little bit different too, in terms of bringing the volume way down, which I just talked about. Within that mesocycle or monthly plan, there's 3 different training types or volumes of training. Within each week, you add variety by changing up the practices as well. How do you change up the practices? If you're doing 2-a-days like we did at the USOEC, we would have Sundays completely off where the athletes would do whatever the heck they wanted to do, and I would sometimes suggest for them to do something so that they would be ready to go on Monday for Monday morning's practice. On Wednesdays, which was midweek, we would only have 1 practice, and that was essentially a recovery day, and we would either play games or we would swim or we would do something so non-related to wrestling so that their minds got an opportunity to break. Again, we're talking about variety, because if you're doing the same thing every single training session, after about 4 or 5 weeks, the athletes will become flat. their minds will become dull. They will get sick of training. They will get sick of you. They will get sick of each other. The chemistry of the team will collapse, and then it will be a complete nightmare. So along the way, because I've seen it actually happen on teams. I've been on teams where we just did the same thing over and over and over and over again, and you just get sick of training. Sports that people love, they get sick of doing it because there is no variety. So again, adding variety to a systematic training plan entailed all those things I just talked about. Within the weekly structure, you can also add variety by changing the amount and the time that you're training, i.e. on a Sunday, maybe there's no training at all. That's a rest day, recovery day. On a Wednesday, you change up the training. You maybe don't do any sport-related exercises at all. So the athletes mentally are getting a break. Physically, they're getting a break because they're using different muscles. Again, we're talking about variety. How can you add variety with academics? It's already built in there, isn't it? And you're saying, well, how is variety built into academics? Most primary and secondary high school and colleges in the USA have six to nine classes, right? Each class is different. You've got a different instructor, you've got a different teacher, you've got a different professor. You have a different academic discipline. You may have different lengths of time that you're in each class, and you may meet with said class 2 or 3 times a week, or in primary and secondary and grade school and whatnot, it's every day. And then as you go through the school system, variety is put right in there. Let's say in first grade, you'll have the same teacher all day. Where I came from in Illinois, by middle school, we had specific teachers for different subjects. By high school, sort of a similar deal, and by college, they completely change the way that you go to school. You don't go to the same class every day. Again, we're talking about variety and how that can enhance your ability to perform at a high level. So if you look at those two models, the sport model or the athletic model and the academic model, variety is already built in there for the most part. Think about this though. Think about if you were in high school and all you studied was physics. Period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4, you got lunch, period 5, period 6, period 7, period 8, or however many periods you have. Not only will the vast majority, I'm talking about let's say 85 to 90%, not only will those vast majority probably fall through the cracks, they may be less likely to stay involved with that particular school. And if they had the option, I guarantee you, over half of them would switch to a school where there was a little bit more variety. Why? Because the mind can only take so much and then it needs a break. So the variety actually builds in the recovery and the breaks and the regeneration just because you're doing something different, right? Can you guys understand how all that works together? So I've given you 2 examples of variety where it's already built into our the way that things are done. What happens though? What happens sometime in sport is, and I've seen this because I've been on teams like this, we do, and I mentioned it before, we do the same thing all the time. You do the same thing all the time. Well, your brain and your body will not expand by demand if you're doing the same thing all the time. There comes a point where you level off, right? And when you level off, that means in order for us to get something more out of this program, and the program could be athletic or academic, we have got to challenge the brain and or the mind and or the muscles. And you challenge the mind by giving it variety. I'll give you a strength and conditioning example. If you do push-ups, 10 push-ups every day, will you actually get stronger? Yeah, probably in the beginning. If you've never done any type of training, 10 push-ups a day, let's say for 2 or 3 weeks, and your muscles are probably ready to do another set of 10 and or 11. Start doing sets of 11. So just by increasing one more set of 10, you've added variety. Now because you've added variety, it probably will become a little more stimulating mentally and psychologically. Because it becomes a little more stimulating psychologically and mentally, maybe you're apt to want to do it more. So adding variety to any type of program is going to, kind of entice the athletes or the students to want to do something a little bit more. And it's less likely to be boring. So I've given you a couple of different examples of how things, just adding a little bit of variety can kind of change things. Other ways that you can add variety: having 1 or more coaches. Because, and this is what they do in the academic setting, right? Once they get to a certain grade level, they start having different teachers per subject. When you have 1 or 2 or 3 or more coaches on a team, that will be a challenge financially. But at most Division I programs that I was aware of, and the one that I was in, man, we had 3 coaches there, plus we had like a volunteer. Because you have those different coaches, you have different personalities, you have a different way of thinking, you have a different way of actually communicating. So that changes things too. Now let's say I have issues with this coach and we come from different backgrounds. Coach B over here thinks maybe a little more similar to me, and I may be able to follow within that same program. I may be able to follow along with that program based on my individual personality, because this coach is here. Now, if we've only got one coach coaching the team, it makes it a challenge. So we're talking about variety again. If you've got several different coaches, just like the academic setting where you've got a teacher per class, now you can keep more students likely to achieve at a high level. Variety. Just gave you a bunch of different examples there with athletics and academics. Now I'm going to give you some examples with job-related things. And this is where it can become a stretch, because, and this may not necessarily be what everybody wants to hear, if you're not being challenged at your job, how can you add variety to it? You can add variety with continuing education, with professional development. You can add variety by moving from one department to the next. You can add variety by, you know, doing things that you wouldn't normally do. And this sounds silly, but it will change the way that your day goes, by the way. If you walk a certain way to work or to the train or to your car or whatever, walk a different way. If you just add variety, and that's an example, you will be able to get more out of each and every single day. When you get more out of each and every day, sometimes it has a stimulus response. Sometimes you become a little more likely to be motivated to do more things. And when those things happen, I think high performance is right around the corner. And that was a job-related example. Of course, at your job, you have to come up with your own examples. I just gave you two. Changing the route that you get to work, which you're going to say that's not big. It's big. Try it. It'll change everything that you're doing. Changing departments with that you're in, and professional development. Those are the three examples. And professional development essentially means learning more about your job and or different parts of your job, so that you may actually want to go into different parts of the job. If you use those three examples in a job-related scenario, you may create more variety for yourself. Again, variety is a spice of life, and that's what we talked about. Variety. Remember, you can find out more information like this at youtube.com. Coach Shannon. Coach Shannon Talks.